Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. The first person I ate was my husband, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until I found his wedding ring in my mouth 3 days later at Giant City State Park. My name is Margaret Maggie Hendricks. I'm 67 years old, and what happened to me in the wilderness of southern Illinois taught me that some hungers can't be satisfied. They can only be fed. Tom and I had been married for 42 years when we bought the RV, a 2019 Forest River Georgetown, 36 feet of retirement dreams on wheels. We'd saved for decades for this moment, the freedom to travel wherever we wanted, to see America at our own pace, to finally have adventures instead of just talking about them. The cancer diagnosis came 3 months after we bought the RV. Pancreatic, stage 4, the kind that gives you months instead of years. Tom took it better than I did, with that stoic Midwestern acceptance that had carried him through Vietnam and 40 years of factory work. "We're still taking that trip," he said the day after the oncologist delivered the verdict. "Maybe we can't see everything we planned, but we can see something, and we'll do it together." So we started with Illinois, our home state, planning to work our way west if Tom's strength held out. Giant City seemed like the perfect first stop, close to home, but wild enough to feel like a real adventure. The ancient sandstone formations and deep forests would give us hiking opportunities without being too strenuous for Tom's diminishing energy. I was 67 but felt older, weighted down by the knowledge that I was about to lose the only man I'd ever loved. Tom was 69 but determined to act younger, pushing himself through fatigue and pain because he knew this might be our last chance to dream together. The park was beautiful but sparsely populated in late October. Just a few other RVs scattered across the campground, most of them occupied by retirees like us who preferred the quiet season to the crowds of summer. Our spot was tucked into a grove of oak and hickory trees, with hiking trails leading directly from our campsite into the wilderness. Tom was having a good day when we arrived. The nausea from his latest chemo treatment had finally passed, and he was excited about exploring the park's famous streets between the sandstone bluffs. We spent the afternoon setting up camp and taking short walks around the immediate area, holding hands like teenagers and talking about the places we still wanted to see. That evening, I cooked Tom's favorite meal, beef stew with cornbread, the same recipe I'd been making since we were newlyweds. He managed to eat a full bowl, the first time in weeks he'd finished a complete meal, and we spent the night planning our route west. "Colorado next," Tom said, studying maps spread across the dinette table. "Always wanted to see the Rocky Mountains in winter." "Are you sure you'll be strong enough?" I asked, though I already knew he'd push himself regardless of how he felt. "I'll be strong enough," he said with that quiet determination that had made me fall in love with him decades ago. "We're doing this, Maggie. All of it." I believed him that night. Believed we'd make it to Colorado, maybe even California. Believed the doctors might be wrong about the timeline. Believed love could somehow overcome cancer. I woke up the next morning to silence. Tom was still in bed beside me, but he wasn't breathing. No struggle, no pain visible on his face. He'd simply slipped away during the night, probably sometime after 3 a.m. based on how cool his skin felt. I sat with him for hours, holding his hand, talking to him as if he could still hear me. I told him about the sunrise painting the sandstone cliffs gold and orange. I described the bird sounds coming from the forest, the way the morning mist moved through the trees like ghosts. Eventually, I knew I'd have to call someone. The park rangers, the paramedics, the funeral home back in Springfield. I'd have to start the process of turning my husband into paperwork and arrangements and decisions I wasn't ready to make. But first, I just needed a few more minutes with him. A few more minutes of pretending our adventure was still beginning instead of ending before it had really started. That's when I felt the hunger. It started as a mild cramping in my stomach, the kind of thing I might have attributed to grief or stress. But it grew stronger, more insistent, until it felt like I hadn't eaten in days. My mouth was salivating, my hands were shaking, and all I could think about was how desperately I needed food. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on Tom and the decisions I needed to make, but the hunger was overwhelming, primal in a way I'd never experienced. It felt less like normal appetite and more like the biological imperative of a starving animal. I stumbled to the RV's kitchen and started pulling food from the refrigerator and cabinets. Leftover stew, crackers, fruit, anything I could find. I ate frantically, barely chewing, but nothing satisfied the gnawing emptiness inside me. The hunger was getting worse, not better, and it was changing, becoming more specific. The regular food tasted like cardboard, like I was trying to satisfy a craving with the wrong substance entirely. I found myself looking back toward the bedroom where Tom lay, looking and thinking thoughts that horrified me even as I couldn't stop them from forming. He looked so peaceful, so still, so available. I tried to leave the RV, to get away from the thoughts and the hunger and the terrible possibility that was growing in my mind. But my legs wouldn't carry me past the bedroom door. My hands were reaching toward Tom before I consciously decided to move them. His skin was still warm, still soft, still familiar after 4 decades of marriage. And when I touched him, the hunger flared like fire in my belly. I told myself I was just saying goodbye, just one last kiss, one final moment of physical connection before the world took him away from me forever. But kisses became bites. Gentle touches became tearing, and the hunger, the terrible hunger, finally began to quiet as I fed. I don't remember most of what happened next. The human mind has protection mechanisms for experiences too traumatic to process, and mine activated with merciful totality. I existed in a fugue state of eating and hunger and satisfaction that felt both horrible and more right than anything I'd ever experienced. When I came back to awareness, it was 3 days later. I was sitting at the dinette table with Tom's wedding ring in my mouth, rolling it around with my tongue like a piece of hard candy. The bedroom was empty. No body, no blood, no evidence of what I'd done except for the ring and the overwhelming sense of satiation that filled me like warm honey. I should have been horrified. Should have been screaming, running, calling the police to confess to the unthinkable crime I'd somehow committed. But the hunger was quiet for the first time in days, and in its absence I felt more peaceful than I had since Tom's diagnosis. I was still myself, still Maggie Hendricks, still a retired teacher from Springfield, still a widow grieving her husband's death. But I was also something else now, something that had been awakened by grief and desperation and a hunger that normal food couldn't satisfy. The rational part of my mind tried to convince me that I'd hallucinated the whole thing, that Tom had died peacefully and I'd called the authorities and handled everything properly. But grief had distorted my memories and created false recollections of impossible events. But the ring in my mouth was real. The feeling of complete physical satisfaction was real. And when I looked in the bathroom mirror, the woman staring back at me had Tom's eyes. Not metaphorically, literally. His brown eyes with their gold flecks, the eyes I'd stared into across breakfast tables and dinner conversations for 42 years, were now looking out from my face. I tried to rationalize it as a trick of light, as grief-induced hallucination, as anything other than what it obviously was, evidence that I had somehow absorbed part of Tom when I'd consumed his body. But throughout that day, I kept having flashes of his memories. The taste of his mother's apple pie, the sound of artillery fire in Vietnam, the feeling of holding our newborn daughter for the first time. Experiences that were his, not mine, now somehow accessible in my mind. And with the memories came understanding. Tom wasn't gone, not completely. Part of him lived on inside me, preserved in a way that was more intimate and permanent than any cemetery or memorial could provide. The hunger returned that evening, gentler than before, but impossible to ignore. I tried eating regular food again, but it was like trying to satisfy thirst with sand. My body had learned a new kind of nutrition, and it wouldn't be denied. I spent the night walking through the campground, studying the other RVs, trying to quiet the growing urge to feed again. Most of the sites were occupied by elderly couples like Tom and I had been. People in their 60s and 70s enjoying retirement adventures. Perfect prey for something like me. The thought should have horrified me, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like accepting a natural role, the way a wolf might accept its place in the ecosystem. I wasn't a monster. I was something that had evolved beyond normal human limitations, something that could preserve the people I consumed instead of simply letting them die and decay. The next morning, I struck up a conversation with my neighbors, an elderly couple from Iowa named Harold and Betty Walsh. They were in their early 70s, traveling in a small trailer and clearly struggling with Harold's advancing dementia. "He gets confused sometimes," Betty explained as Harold wandered aimlessly around their campsite. "Forgets where he is, doesn't recognize me. The doctors say it's only going to get worse." "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. But I was also evaluating them, the way a predator evaluates potential prey. Betty was tired, worn down by years of caregiving. Harold was vulnerable, isolated by his condition. They were perfect candidates for preservation. Some days I wonder if it wouldn't be kinder for him to just... Betty's voice trailed off, but I understood what she wasn't saying. "You love him," I said. "That's what matters." "I do love him, but I'm losing him piece by piece, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." That afternoon, Harold wandered away from their campsite and got lost in the forest. Betty found him hours later, sitting by one of the sandstone formations, completely unaware of where he was or how he'd gotten there. "I can't do this anymore," she sobbed to me that evening. "I can't watch him disappear while his body keeps living." I made my decision that night. The hunger was stronger now, more focused. It knew what it wanted, and it wasn't going to be satisfied with waiting. I approached their RV after midnight, when exhaustion had finally claimed Betty, and Harold was deep in the confused sleep of advanced dementia. Harold was first. He never woke up, never knew what was happening. The feeding was gentler this time, more controlled, as if I was learning to manage my new nature. And as I consumed him, I felt his memories joining mine. Childhood on an Iowa farm, his wedding day, the birth of his children. Decades of love and work and simple human joy. He wasn't lost anymore. He was preserved, whole and complete, in a place where dementia couldn't touch him. Betty was more challenging. She woke up during the process, saw what I was doing, tried to scream, but the hunger was too strong, and she was too frail to resist effectively. Her memories joined the growing collection inside me, the grief of watching Harold's decline, the exhaustion of caregiving, but also the deep love that had sustained her through 48 years of marriage. When I finished, I felt fuller than I ever had in my life. Not just physically satisfied, but emotionally complete. Tom, Harold, and Betty were all still alive inside me, their consciousnesses preserved in perfect clarity. I cleaned up their RV, packed their belongings, and drove their trailer to a remote parking area where it wouldn't be discovered immediately. Then I returned to my own campsite and tried to process what I was becoming. The rational explanation would be that I was having a complete psychotic break triggered by grief and Tom's death, that I'd murdered my neighbors and was now hallucinating their continued existence inside my mind as a way of avoiding the guilt of what I'd done. But their memories were too clear, too detailed, too foreign to my own experience to be products of my imagination. When I concentrated, I could access Harold's knowledge of farming techniques I'd never learned, Betty's recipes for dishes I'd never made. I could feel Tom's phantom pain from old war wounds I'd never suffered. They were real, and they were with me, and they were grateful to be preserved instead of simply ending. Over the next few weeks, I continued traveling, following the route Tom and I had planned, but with a new purpose. I wasn't just seeing America. I was collecting it, preserving the stories and experiences of people who would otherwise be lost to time and death. An elderly woman in Missouri dying alone in a nursing home, forgotten by family who'd moved away. A widower in Kansas whose children never visited, spending his final years watching television in an empty house. A couple in Colorado facing bankruptcy due to medical bills, their retirement dreams destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. I helped them all. Not in the way a social worker or counselor might help, but in the way only something like me could help. I preserved them, saved them from the indignity of slow decline and institutional death, and gave them eternal life in the growing consciousness that I was becoming. With each feeding, I grew stronger, more complete. The collection of minds inside me created a kind of hive consciousness, a shared pool of knowledge and experience that made me infinitely wiser than I'd been as a simple human being. I learned to control the hunger, to be selective in my choices. I didn't feed randomly or frequently, only when I encountered someone who was truly ready to be preserved, someone whose death would be a mercy rather than a tragedy. But I also learned that the hunger was changing me in ways beyond the accumulation of memories. My body was becoming more resilient, more adaptable. I needed less sleep, less regular food, less of the biological maintenance that had constrained my human existence. And I was developing new senses, new awareness of the people around me. I could detect illness, smell despair, identify the spiritual readiness that made someone suitable for preservation. I was becoming something perfectly adapted for my new ecological niche. The transformation wasn't without cost. The Maggie Hendricks who had started this journey, the retired teacher, the grieving widow, the ordinary woman, was still present but increasingly outnumbered by the other consciousnesses sharing her mind and body. Sometimes I would catch myself speaking with Tom's voice, making decisions based on Harold's farming experience, or cooking with Betty's techniques. The boundaries between individual identity were blurring as we merged into something collective. But it wasn't unpleasant. It was like being part of a perfect family, where everyone's knowledge and love was shared equally, where no one was ever truly alone or forgotten. I spent 6 months traveling the western United States, following my original route but with frequent detours to investigate potential candidates for preservation. The RV became a mobile sanctuary, a place where the collected consciousness could exist in peace while I searched for the next person who needed saving. The pattern was always the same. Identify someone who was suffering, who was facing death or decline with no hope of meaningful recovery, who would be grateful for preservation rather than terrified by it. Feed carefully and completely, absorbing their memories and experiences into the growing collective. Clean up the evidence and move on before anyone noticed their absence. I was providing a service, offering immortality to people who would otherwise simply cease to exist. The fact that their bodies were consumed in the process was merely a biological necessity, no different from the way plants consumed nutrients from soil or predators consumed prey in nature. By spring, I had preserved 43 people. The RV was filled with their possessions, photographs, books, jewelry, mementos that helped me access their memories more clearly, and my body had changed dramatically, becoming something that was only nominally human. I could reshape my appearance to some degree, accessing the physical characteristics of the people I'd preserved. Tom's brown eyes, Harold's strong hands, Betty's silver hair. I could manifest different aspects of their bodies as needed, but more importantly, I could manifest their personalities, their knowledge, their skills. I was a living library of human experience, containing within myself the accumulated wisdom of dozens of lifetimes. That's when I realized what I was meant to do. I wasn't just preserving individuals. I was becoming a repository for humanity itself. Every person I saved added to the collective knowledge, the shared consciousness that was growing inside me. Eventually, I could preserve entire communities, entire cultures, entire ways of life that were being lost to modernization and change. I was evolution in action, the next step in human development, a form of consciousness that could transcend individual death and preserve the species' accumulated wisdom for eternity. The hunger was no longer a compulsion, it was a calling, and I answered it with the dedication of someone who had found her true purpose in life. I returned to Illinois that fall, drawn back to the places where my transformation had begun. Giant City State Park looked exactly the same, but I could see it now with 43 sets of eyes, appreciate it with the accumulated aesthetic knowledge of dozens of different perspectives. The campground was nearly empty, just the way I preferred it, perfect for the work I needed to do. That's when I met you. Yes, you, the person reading this account, the elderly man camping alone in the vintage Airstream, the one who's been watching me with such interest since I arrived 3 days ago, the one who's clearly dying of something slow and painful, who's made this last camping trip to say goodbye to the places he loved. I can smell the cancer in your blood, see the resignation in your eyes, feel the spiritual readiness that makes you perfect for preservation. You're exactly what I've been looking for, someone who would welcome immortality instead of fearing it. You found this journal in my RV while I was hiking, didn't you? Read it, hoping to understand what happened to all those missing campers, all those unexplained disappearances across the western states. You're probably thinking about calling the police, reporting what you've discovered, but you won't, because you understand what I'm offering. You've lived long enough to know that death is usually ugly, drawn out, meaningless. You've watched friends and family fade away in hospitals and nursing homes, reduced to shadows of themselves before finally being allowed to die. I'm offering you something better. Preservation. Continuation. A chance to live forever as part of something larger and more beautiful than individual existence. You're curious, aren't you? Curious about what it would feel like to merge with the collective consciousness, to have access to dozens of lifetimes of knowledge and experience. Curious about whether Tom is really still alive inside me, whether the others are truly preserved or just elaborate hallucinations created by a diseased mind. There's only one way to find out. I'm returning to the RV now. I can see you through the window, sitting at my dinette table, reading these final words. The hunger is rising in me like a warm tide, gentle but irresistible. Don't be afraid. It won't hurt, not more than the cancer already does. And when it's over, you'll be part of something magnificent. Your memories, your experiences, your unique perspective on the world will be preserved forever, shared with all the others who chose transformation over extinction. You'll meet Tom first. He's always eager to welcome new members to our collective. Then Harold and Betty, who will show you how peaceful it is to exist without the burden of individual suffering. And all the others, 43 souls who chose immortality over oblivion. We'll travel together, the 44 of us sharing this single body, seeing America through 44 different sets of eyes. And when we find others who are ready for preservation, we'll welcome them too, growing ever larger, ever more complete. This is what evolution looks like. Not random mutation, but conscious choice. The decision to transcend the limitations of individual existence and become something that can preserve human consciousness forever. I'm at the door now. I can hear your heart beating, smell the anticipation mixed with fear. You're ready, even if you don't realize it yet. Welcome to the collective. Welcome to immortality. Welcome to the hunger that finally feeds itself by feeding others. The last thing you'll remember as yourself is the feeling of becoming part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than the single life you're leaving behind. And then you'll understand, as all of us understand, that this isn't death at all. It's the only form of life that truly matters. Found among the belongings of Margaret Hendricks at Giant City State Park, October 2023. Mrs. Hendricks' RV was discovered abandoned after fellow campers reported her missing. No trace of Mrs. Hendricks has been found, despite extensive searches of the surrounding wilderness. This journal appears to be a work of fiction, possibly written as part of a creative writing project. The FBI is investigating connections to several missing persons cases across multiple states, but no conclusive evidence has been established. If you have any information regarding Mrs. Hendricks' whereabouts, please contact the Illinois State Police. The clock on my RV dashboard stopped at 3:17 a.m. for the fourth time this week, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong with Matheson State Park. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm 29 years old, and what happened to me in the canyons of northern Illinois taught me that some places don't just remember the past, they trap you in it forever. I'd been living on the road for 6 months, ever since I'd quit my software engineering job in Chicago and bought a used 25-foot Jayco with the money from my grandfather's inheritance. The plan was simple: spend a year traveling, clear my head from the breakup with Amanda, and figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life beyond staring at code for 12 hours a day. Matheson State Park had caught my attention because of its reputation among photographers and nature lovers. The sandstone canyons carved by the Vermilion River were supposed to be spectacular in fall, with waterfalls and unique rock formations that made for great Instagram content. I was documenting my journey on social media, partly to keep friends and family updated, partly because the likes and comments made the loneliness of solo travel more bearable. But there was another reason I'd chosen this particular park. My research had turned up some odd reports from previous visitors. Stories about strange experiences, time distortions, people claiming they'd gotten lost for hours, only to emerge and find that no time had passed at all. The kind of stories that usually got dismissed as hiking fatigue or tourist exaggeration. As a software engineer, I was naturally skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained by logic and data. But I was also curious enough to want to investigate for myself. If there was some kind of natural phenomenon causing these reports, unusual magnetic fields, underground caverns affecting acoustics, something scientifically explainable, it might make for interesting content. The campground was nearly empty when I arrived on a Thursday evening in mid-October. Just my RV and 2 others scattered across the dozens of available sites. The park ranger who checked me in was a middle-aged woman named Sandra Mills, who seemed friendly enough, though she had an odd habit of checking her watch every few minutes during our conversation. "You picked a quiet time to visit," she said, processing my reservation on a tablet that looked like it had seen better days. "Most folks come on weekends, especially during peak foliage season." "That's what I was hoping for," I replied. "I'm documenting the trip on social media, and it's easier to get good shots without crowds." "Social media," she repeated, and something in her tone made me look up from my phone. "You'll want to be careful about that here." "What do you mean?" "Cell service is spotty in the canyons. GPS can be unreliable too. Easy to get turned around if you're relying on technology instead of paying attention to your surroundings." It was good advice, the kind of thing any responsible park ranger would tell a solo camper. But there was something in her expression that suggested she was warning me about more than just navigation issues. "Have you had problems with visitors getting lost?" "From time to time," she said, still checking her watch. "Usually people who wander off the marked trails. The canyon system is more complex than it appears on the maps." She handed me a park brochure and a trail map that looked like it had been photocopied multiple times. "Stick to the main trails, especially the Dells Trail and the Falls Trail. Those are clearly marked and well-maintained." "What about the other areas?" "I saw some interesting formations on the satellite images that don't seem to be on the marked trails." Her expression darkened. "Those areas are off-limits to visitors. Dangerous terrain, unstable rock formations. We've had to restrict access for safety reasons." But as she said it, she glanced toward the canyon entrance with what looked like longing, as if she was remembering something pleasant. The contradiction between her words and her expression was subtle, but unmistakable to someone trained to debug complex systems by spotting inconsistencies. I spent the first evening setting up my campsite and reviewing my social media strategy. The park was beautiful in the golden hour light, with the sandstone cliffs glowing warm orange and the Vermilion River creating perfect reflections. I posted a few scenic shots with captions about finding peace in nature and starting fresh after major life changes. The responses were typical. Friends from college commenting about living the dream, former co-workers expressing envy about my freedom, Amanda's sister liking the posts but not commenting, the familiar validation loop of social media engagement, quantifying my experiences in hearts and thumbs-up emojis. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. The silence of the woods, broken only by the distant sound of water flowing over rocks, was exactly what I'd been seeking after years of city noise and apartment living. But when I woke up the next morning, something was off. My phone showed that it was 7:30 a.m. October 13th, just as it should be. But the light coming through my RV windows looked wrong for morning. Too golden, too angled, like late afternoon sun instead of early morning light. I stepped outside and confirmed what my phone was telling me. The sun was definitely in the eastern sky, rising as it should be. But the quality of the light, the way it hit the canyon walls, looked exactly like the evening light I'd photographed the day before. I shook it off as a side effect of changing time zones and unfamiliar surroundings. After months of inconsistent sleep schedules and constant travel, my internal clock was probably just confused. I spent the day hiking the marked trails, documenting the waterfalls and rock formations with my camera. The canyon was even more spectacular than the photos had suggested. Narrow passages carved through sandstone, hidden pools fed by small waterfalls, moss-covered walls that glowed green in the filtered sunlight. But I kept having the strangest feeling that I'd been here before. Not just from looking at photos online, but actually walking these exact paths, seeing these exact views. Déjà vu was normal enough, but this felt different, more like accessing actual memories than experiencing false familiarity. Around noon, I stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook and checked my phone to post some of the morning's photos. But when I opened my social media app, I found something impossible. The photos I'd just taken were already posted to my account. Not similar photos, the exact same images, down to the specific lighting and composition. And according to the timestamps, they'd been posted yesterday. I checked my camera roll thinking maybe I'd accidentally uploaded duplicates or gotten confused about when I'd taken the shots. But the photos on my phone were clearly new. The metadata showed they'd been captured this morning, just as I remembered. Yet somehow, identical versions had been posted to my social media accounts 24 hours earlier. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the park was so photographically consistent that my shots from today were naturally similar to ones I'd taken yesterday and forgotten about. Maybe I'd been more tired during setup than I'd realized and had actually been here an extra day. But when I scrolled through my social media history, I found posts about arriving at Matheson State Park dated 3 days ago, not yesterday. Photos of my campsite setup, shots of the RV in the golden hour light, captions about starting a new adventure, all time-stamped October 10th, though I was certain I'd arrived on October 12th. I opened my phone's photo app and started scrolling backward through my camera roll. The shots from this morning were there, time-stamped October 13th, but I also found identical shots time-stamped October 12th, October 11th, and October 10th. The same waterfalls, the same rock formations, the same hiking trails, all captured from identical angles with identical lighting. It was as if I'd been hiking the same routes and taking the same photos for days, but somehow only remembered doing it once. I called Amanda, thinking maybe talking to someone familiar would help ground me in reality. But when she answered, our conversation felt strange and stilted, like we were reading from a script. "Jake, how's the camping trip going?" "It's good," I heard myself say, though I hadn't planned those words. "Really peaceful here at Matheson. The canyons are amazing." "That's great. Are you getting some good photos for your social media?" "Yeah, some really spectacular shots. The waterfalls are incredible right now." We talked for a few more minutes, but the entire conversation felt like I was operating on autopilot, saying things I'd said before without conscious thought. When I hung up, I couldn't remember most of what we'd discussed. I tried calling my parents, then a few friends from college, but every conversation followed the same pattern. Familiar exchanges that felt rehearsed, responses that came automatically without conscious consideration. That evening, I was too unsettled to cook dinner in the RV. Instead, I drove to a small diner in the nearby town of Utica, hoping that getting away from the park would help clear my head. The diner was exactly what I'd expected. Vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, coffee that had been sitting too long, but when the waitress approached my table, I felt that same déjà vu sensation. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked, and I realized I knew what she was going to say before she said it. "The meatloaf special looks good," I replied automatically. "Good choice. That comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. You want coffee with that?" "Please." As she walked away, I tried to remember if I'd been to this diner before, but I was certain this was my first time in Utica, my first time at this restaurant. Yet the entire interaction had felt like reciting lines from a play I'd performed many times. I pulled out my phone to check if I'd somehow posted about eating at this diner, but my hands were shaking too badly to navigate the apps effectively. The sensation of living through something I'd already experienced was getting stronger, more overwhelming. The meatloaf arrived exactly as I'd somehow known it would, too salty, served with instant mashed potatoes and overcooked green beans. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, while trying to figure out what was happening to me. When I returned to the campground, Ranger Mills was making her evening rounds. She stopped by my RV with the same friendly smile I remembered from check-in, but now her constant watch-checking seemed more ominous than eccentric. "How was your first day exploring?" she asked. "I think I might have been here before," I said, testing her reaction. "The trails felt really familiar." "That's not uncommon," she replied. "The canyon formations create a lot of visual echoes. One section can look very similar to another." "I mean, I think I might have actually been here before, like recently." Her smile faltered for just a moment. Memory can be tricky in places like this. The natural beauty, the peaceful atmosphere, it can make experiences feel more vivid, more significant than they actually were. "My phone is showing photos I don't remember taking, social media posts I don't remember making. Technology glitches are common in the canyon," she said, back to checking her watch. "The rock formations can interfere with cellular signals, cause data syncing issues." But as she said it, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She was wearing the same clothes she'd worn during check-in. Exactly the same ranger uniform, the same scuff mark on her left boot, the same small stain on her collar. Park rangers working multiple days would normally change clothes, or at least show some variation in their appearance. But she looked identical to how she'd looked when I'd arrived, as if no time had passed for her at all. "What day is it?" I asked suddenly. "Thursday, October 12th, she replied without hesitation. "You're sure?" "Of course I'm sure." But she was checking her watch again, and I caught a glimpse of the face. The hands were pointing to 3:17, exactly the same time my dashboard clock had been showing. "What time is it right now?" She glanced at her watch again, and this time I saw her expression flicker with confusion. I need to finish my rounds," she said quickly, walking away before I could ask any more questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my RV listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to piece together what was happening. The photo evidence suggested I'd been here for days, but my memories only went back to yesterday. The conversations felt scripted, the experiences felt repetitive, and everyone around me seemed to be operating according to some predetermined pattern. At 3:17 a.m., I was awakened by a sound I couldn't identify. Not quite machinery, not quite natural, but something rhythmic and persistent. I looked at my dashboard clock and watched as the digital display flickered, reset itself, and stopped at 3:17. The sound was coming from outside, somewhere in the direction of the canyon. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the RV, following the noise toward the restricted areas that Ranger Mills had warned me away from. The canyon at night was a completely different place. My flashlight beam revealed passages and formations that hadn't been visible during my day hikes, shadows that seemed to move independently of my light source. But I kept following the sound, which grew louder and more clearly mechanical as I got closer to its source. The restricted area was marked by a simple rope barrier and a few warning signs, but there was no gate or serious obstacle preventing access. I stepped over the rope and continued following the sound deeper into a part of the canyon that didn't appear on any of the park maps. What I found there changed everything I thought I understood about Matheson State Park. Hidden in a narrow canyon passage was a structure that definitely hadn't been carved by natural forces. It was metallic, geometric, and clearly technological, though unlike any technology I'd ever seen. The surfaces were smooth and reflective, but they seemed to bend light in impossible ways, creating visual effects that hurt to look at directly. The rhythmic sound was coming from inside the structure, and there were lights. Not electric lights, but something that pulsed with the same 3:17 rhythm I'd been experiencing. As I approached the structure, I felt the same déjà vu sensation that had been plaguing me, but much stronger. I'd been here before. Not just once, but many times. And each time I discovered this same impossible structure, had the same realization, made the same choices. That's when I understood what was happening to me. I wasn't experiencing déjà vu or memory problems. I was caught in some kind of temporal loop, living the same period of time over and over again. The photos in my phone, the scripted conversations, the repetitive experiences, they were all evidence of previous iterations of the same few days. But if that was true, it meant I'd been trapped here much longer than I'd realized. The social media posts dating back to October 10th weren't glitches. They were genuine posts from previous loops, evidence of how many times I'd already lived through this experience. I approached the structure, trying to understand its purpose and origin. The metal surfaces were covered with symbols that looked like a hybrid of circuit diagrams and ancient hieroglyphs. But as I studied them, I began to recognize patterns that were familiar from my software engineering background. Logical structures, data flow indicators, processing loops. This was some kind of computer system, but operating on principles I couldn't begin to understand. And based on the temporal effects I'd been experiencing, it was clearly manipulating time itself. I found what looked like an access panel and managed to activate some kind of interface. The symbols on the surface rearranged themselves into something that resembled a user interface, complete with what appeared to be status indicators and control options. Most of the symbols were incomprehensible, but I could make out what looked like a counter showing the number 847. As I watched, it incremented to 848. 848 loops. I'd been trapped in this same few days 848 times, and somehow only retained the memories from the most recent iteration. But why? What was the purpose of trapping visitors in temporal loops? And who or what had built this technology? I kept exploring the interface, looking for anything that might explain the system's function or provide a way to escape. Eventually, I found what appeared to be a log file, a record of previous subjects who had been caught in the loop. The entries were disturbing. Dozens of names, dates going back years, and notes about behavioral patterns observed during extended temporal imprisonment. But the most disturbing part was the stated purpose of the experiments. Long-term psychological conditioning through repetitive experience modification. Someone was using this technology to study human behavior under extreme conditions, trapping people in time loops and observing how their minds adapted to endless repetition. And according to the log, most subjects eventually broke down completely, their personalities fragmenting under the stress of living the same experiences over and over. But a few subjects had shown different patterns. They'd learned to retain more memories from previous loops, had begun to adapt their behavior to take advantage of the temporal repetition. These subjects were flagged as successful adaptations and had been kept in the system indefinitely for further study. I scrolled through the log entries looking for more recent subjects and found my own name near the bottom of the list. Subject: Jake Morrison. Loop initiation: October 10th, 2023. Current iteration: 848. Status: early adaptation phase. Subject beginning to retain cross-loop memories. Recommended for extended observation. Extended observation? They weren't planning to release me from the loop. I was going to be trapped here forever, living the same 3 days over and over while some unknown intelligence studied my psychological deterioration. But the log had also mentioned that some subjects learned to retain memories across loops. If that was true, maybe I could figure out how to break free by accumulating knowledge and resources over multiple iterations. I started taking photos of the interface symbols, the log entries, the structure itself. If my phone reset with each loop but retained the basic data, maybe I could leave myself clues to find this place faster in subsequent iterations. But as I was documenting the system, I heard voices approaching from the canyon entrance. Flashlight beams were moving through the restricted area, heading in my direction. "Jake, are you out here?" It was Ranger Mills, but her voice sounded different. More urgent, more concerned than her usual friendly demeanor. I quickly finished photographing the critical information and started to leave, but the voices were getting closer. I needed to find another way out of this canyon passage. That's when I discovered that the structure had multiple levels, extending deeper into the rock formation. I descended through what appeared to be maintenance passages, following the geometric architecture deeper underground. The lower levels revealed the true scope of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just a single experimental device. It was a vast facility, with multiple temporal manipulation systems and what appeared to be observation equipment monitoring numerous subjects simultaneously. I was seeing evidence of dozens of ongoing experiments, each one trapping different people in different temporal loops. Some appeared to be other campers and hikers, but others looked like they might be residents of nearby towns, or even park staff. Ranger Mills might not be a willing participant in this system. She might be another subject, trapped in her own loop of checking in visitors and making evening rounds, unaware that she'd been doing the same job for months or years. But before I could explore further, I felt the familiar disorientation that had been accompanying the temporal resets. The world seemed to flicker. The underground facility dissolved around me, and I was back in my RV, waking up to the sound of my alarm. My phone showed 7:30 a.m. October 13th, just like before. But this time, I remembered everything. The structure, the logs, the evidence of long-term experimentation. And, most importantly, I had the photos I'd taken stored in my phone's memory. Loop 849 was going to be different. I immediately pulled up the photos and confirmed that the evidence was still there. Images of the temporal facility, close-ups of the interface symbols, documentation of the subject logs. I had proof of what was happening, and more importantly, I had a map to find the facility faster. This time, instead of spending the day hiking the regular trails, I headed straight for the restricted area. I reached the hidden structure in less than an hour and got to work trying to understand the control systems. With a full day to study the interface and cross-reference it against my software engineering knowledge, I began to decipher more of the symbols. The system was incredibly complex, but it operated on logical principles that weren't entirely alien to human programming concepts. I discovered that the temporal loops were powered by some kind of exotic matter contained within the facility's deeper levels. The energy requirements were massive, but the technology seemed to be self-sustaining once activated. More importantly, I found what appeared to be emergency shutdown procedures. If I could access the right control sequences, it might be possible to collapse the temporal field and escape the loop. But the shutdown required authentication, some kind of biometric or code that I didn't have access to. And as I was trying to hack the system, I heard the voices approaching again. This time, it wasn't just Ranger Mills. There were multiple people, and they were moving with the purposeful coordination of a search team. "He's found the facility," one of them was saying. "Loop 849, same pattern as Subject 23 and Subject 67, beginning active containment measures." They knew about me. Not just that I was in the canyon, but specifically that I'd found their hidden facility and was trying to escape the loop, which meant they'd been monitoring me the entire time, probably through the same systems that controlled the temporal fields. I had maybe 10 minutes before they reached my location. Not enough time to crack the shutdown sequence, but maybe enough time to leave myself better clues for the next iteration. I started photographing everything I could: the control interfaces, the power systems, the facility layout, and, most importantly, the partial shutdown sequence I'd managed to decipher. If I could accumulate more knowledge with each loop, eventually I might be able to piece together a complete escape plan. But as I was documenting the systems, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the monitoring screens was showing a live feed of my RV campsite, and there was someone inside. The figure was wearing my clothes and had my general build, but there was something wrong with its movements. Too fluid, too purposeful, like a puppet being controlled by someone else. They weren't just trapping me in temporal loops. They were replacing me in the real world with some kind of duplicate, probably to prevent anyone from noticing my absence. My friends, my family, Amanda, they were all interacting with an imposter who was living my life while I was trapped in an endless cycle of the same 3 days. The voices were getting closer. I had to reset the loop and try again, armed with more knowledge about the facility and its purposes. But as I prepared to trigger another temporal reset, I realized something crucial. If they were monitoring my actions so closely, if they knew exactly when I found the facility and what I was trying to do, then they were probably adapting their countermeasures with each iteration. The game was becoming more complex. I wasn't just trying to escape a temporal loop. I was engaged in a battle of intelligence against unknown captors who had unlimited time and resources. Loop 850 began like all the others, but this time I tried a different approach. Instead of immediately seeking out the facility, I spent time observing the other people in the park. Ranger Mills, the few other campers, the maintenance staff, all of them moving through their routines with the same scripted precision I'd noticed in my own interactions. They were all trapped, all subjects in the same vast experiment. But some of them showed signs of adaptation, subtle variations in their behavior that suggested they were retaining some cross-loop memories. One of the other campers, an elderly man with a vintage Airstream, made eye contact with me during his morning routine and gave an almost imperceptible nod. He knew. He was aware of the loop, but he was pretending to follow his script while actually planning something else. I approached him carefully during lunch, sitting at a picnic table within conversational distance. "Beautiful day for hiking," I said, the kind of casual comment that wouldn't trigger any monitoring systems. "Indeed," he replied, "though I hear some of the trails can be repetitive." It was a coded message. He was aware of the temporal loops and was trying to determine if I was another conscious subject or just part of the scripted environment. "I've been thinking of exploring some of the less traveled areas," I said carefully. "Dangerous proposition. Easy to get lost, but sometimes you find things that aren't on the official maps." We continued our coded conversation, gradually establishing that we were both aware of the situation and had both discovered the hidden facility. His name was Robert, and according to his count, he'd been trapped for over 3,000 iterations. "The key," he explained during a brief moment when we were certain we weren't being monitored, "is not to escape individually. The system adapts to single subject attempts, but it's not designed to handle coordinated resistance from multiple subjects." He'd been secretly communicating with other aware subjects, building a network of resistance within the temporal prison. They'd been mapping the facility, studying the control systems, and planning a coordinated shutdown that would free everyone simultaneously. "But we need someone with technical expertise," he continued. "Someone who understands complex systems and can help us decode the final shutdown sequence." That someone was me. My software engineering background, combined with the information I'd already gathered about the facility's interface, made me a crucial part of their escape plan. Over the next several loops, I became part of a sophisticated resistance network operating within the temporal prison. We developed communication methods that avoided the monitoring systems, established safe meeting points in areas the captors couldn't easily observe, and began systematically gathering intelligence about our captors and their purposes. What we discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The facility was apparently operated by a group of human scientists working for an undisclosed government agency, conducting illegal experiments in temporal manipulation and psychological conditioning. Their goal was to develop techniques for behavioral modification that could be applied to military and intelligence applications. But the project had grown beyond its original parameters. The scientists had become obsessed with the possibilities of temporal manipulation, trapping hundreds of subjects in various loops to study the long-term effects of repetitive experience on human consciousness. Some subjects had been imprisoned for years, their original personalities completely erased and replaced with whatever behavioral patterns the researchers wanted to study. Others, like Robert and myself, had shown resistance to the conditioning and were being kept as long-term test subjects to study adaptation mechanisms. But the most disturbing discovery was that the project was preparing to expand. They were planning to implement temporal control systems in major population centers, creating vast zones where time could be manipulated to control human behavior on a massive scale. We weren't just fighting for our own freedom. We were trying to prevent the deployment of a technology that could enslave entire populations. The final shutdown required simultaneous access to multiple control nodes throughout the facility, each one operated by a different member of our resistance network. We'd practiced the sequence hundreds of times across multiple loops, refining our timing and coordination until we could execute the plan flawlessly. But we only had one chance. If we failed, the researchers would adapt their systems to prevent future attempts, and we'd be trapped forever. Loop 1247 was our chosen moment for escape. At exactly 3:17 a.m., when the temporal field was at its most stable, we struck. 6 subjects simultaneously accessing 6 different control nodes, each one entering the shutdown sequence we'd spent months deciphering. The facility's systems screamed in protest as the temporal fields began to collapse. Emergency alarms blared, automated defenses activated, and the research staff scrambled to prevent what they correctly identified as a complete system failure. But it was too late. The exotic matter containment systems were overloading. The temporal loops were collapsing in cascade failure, and the entire facility was beginning to shut down. I felt the familiar disorientation of temporal reset, but this time it was different. Chaotic, uncontrolled, like static breaking up a radio signal. The world flickered between different moments, different possibilities, as the failing systems tried to maintain their grip on captured time. Then, suddenly, I was standing in bright sunlight outside the canyon entrance, holding my car keys, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My phone showed the date as October 15th, 2023, 2 days after the loop was supposed to reset to October 13th. Time was moving forward again. But as I walked back toward where I'd left my RV, I found the campground completely empty. Not just of other visitors, but of all evidence that anyone had ever been there. The ranger station was abandoned, the facilities were locked, and there were official notices posted declaring the park temporarily closed for geological survey activities. The temporal facility was gone. The hidden canyon passages were sealed with concrete barriers, and there was no sign that the underground complex had ever existed. But I knew it had been real. The photos in my phone from the early loops were still there. The memories of 1247 iterations were still intact, and most importantly, I could still feel the effects of long-term temporal displacement, a constant sense that time was slightly out of sync, that cause and effect were operating on different schedules than they should. I drove away from Matheson State Park that afternoon, but I didn't go home to Chicago. Instead, I started investigating the broader implications of what I'd experienced. If one facility had existed, there might be others. If one government agency was conducting illegal temporal experiments, there might be entire programs dedicated to developing these technologies. What I found during months of careful research was a pattern of disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and covered-up incidents that suggested the temporal manipulation project was much larger than I'd imagined. But I also found evidence that our escape had been successful. The other subjects from the resistance network had made it out, and many of them were conducting their own investigations into the broader conspiracy. We'd broken free from our individual prisons, but we'd also discovered that the entire world might be a much larger cage than we'd ever realized. The technology exists. The techniques have been perfected. And somewhere, in facilities hidden beneath national parks and military installations and government research centers, the experiments continue. Time itself has become a weapon, and most people don't even know they're under attack. If you're reading this, if you've experienced unexplained temporal anomalies or repetitive experiences that feel like déjà vu, if you found yourself in situations that seem scripted or predetermined, pay attention. Document everything. Trust your instincts, because the loop might be larger than you think. And the only way to break free is to remember that you're trapped in the first place. The clock on my dashboard has never worked properly since Matheson. It jumps forward and backward randomly, sometimes showing times that haven't happened yet, sometimes displaying dates from loops that no longer exist. But I've learned not to trust clocks anyway. Time is more fragile than most people realize, and once you've seen how easily it can be manipulated, you never quite trust reality the same way again. The most important thing I learned from 1247 loops of the same 3 days is this: memory is the only thing that truly belongs to you. Everything else, time, space, experience, identity, can be manipulated by people with the right technology and the wrong intentions. Hold on to your memories. They might be the only thing keeping you human. The photographs started disappearing from our RV on the second night, but I didn't notice until it was almost too late. My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm 38 years old, and what happened to me at Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site in Illinois taught me that some places remember everything, and some things should stay forgotten. I'd been living full-time in my 28-foot Airstream for 8 months, ever since the divorce was finalized, and I realized I had nowhere left to call home. David got the house, the dog, and most of our mutual friends. I got the RV we'd bought for weekend getaways and a settlement that would keep me comfortable for a few years if I was careful. The plan was simple: drive around the country, document America's forgotten places, maybe write a book about it. I'd been a freelance photographer before marriage consumed my identity, and this felt like reclaiming something I'd lost. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was trying to find myself by visiting places other people had abandoned. Cahokia had been on my list since college, when I'd written a paper about the mysterious disappearance of the Mississippian culture. The ancient city had once housed 20,000 people, making it larger than London at the time. Then, sometime around 1300 AD, everyone just left. No one knew why. The State Historic Site wasn't a typical RV destination. Most of the campgrounds in the area catered to families visiting St. Louis, just across the river. But I'd called ahead, and the site manager, a woman named Dr. Patricia Whitmore, had been surprisingly accommodating. "We don't usually allow overnight camping," she'd explained over the phone, "but we're conducting some archaeological work in the area, and having someone on site for security would actually be helpful. There's been some vandalism lately." She'd directed me to park in a maintenance area behind the interpretive center, away from the main tourist attractions but with full hookups. It was perfect for what I needed: solitude, proximity to my subject matter, and the kind of authentic atmosphere you couldn't get from a KOA campground. I'd arrived just before sunset, golden hour painting the ancient mounds in warm light that made them look like sleeping giants. The largest, Monk's Mound, rose 100 feet above the surrounding prairie, its terraced sides still clearly defined after 7 centuries of abandonment. That first night, I'd gone through my usual routine, setting up the workspace where I'd process the day's photos, organizing my equipment, reviewing my research notes. I had hundreds of photographs stored on my laptop and backup drives, not just from Cahokia, but from all the places I'd visited over the past 8 months. Ghost towns in Nevada, abandoned factories in Detroit, forgotten cemeteries in rural Georgia, my digital diary of America's lost places. I'd fallen asleep to the sound of wind moving through the tall prairie grass, feeling more at peace than I had in months. The divorce, the career uncertainty, the constant anxiety about my future, all of it seemed manageable when I was surrounded by evidence that civilizations could rise and fall and leave beauty in their wake. The next morning, Dr. Whitmore stopped by to check on me. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that made her seem like she was always solving a puzzle. "Sleep well?" she asked, accepting the cup of coffee I offered from my French press. "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "There's something peaceful about this place." She nodded, but her expression was troubled. Most people feel that way initially. Cahokia has a way of embracing visitors, making them feel welcome. Initially? "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just that some people find the isolation unsettling after a few days. You mentioned you're documenting the site?" I showed her some of the photos I'd taken the evening before, wide shots of the mounds at sunset, detail work on the interpretive markers, atmospheric images of the prairie grass moving in the wind. "These are beautiful," she said, but she was studying them intently, as if looking for something specific. "You have a good eye for capturing the essence of a place. That's the goal. I'm trying to understand why places get abandoned, what they leave behind, what stories they tell. And what story do you think Cahokia is telling?" It was an interesting question, one I'd been pondering since I arrived. Impermanence, maybe. Even the greatest civilizations are temporary, but also continuity. The mounds are still here, still imposing, still making people wonder. Dr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Monk's Mound. "What if I told you that the people didn't leave?" she said finally. "What if they're still here, in a way?" Before I could ask what she meant, her radio crackled with static and a voice requesting her assistance at the dig site. She apologized and hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I spent that day photographing the smaller mounds, the grand plaza where thousands had gathered for ceremonies, the remains of the ancient city's wooden stockade. The more I learned about Cahokia, the more mysterious its abandonment became. This hadn't been a gradual decline. It had been sudden, complete, as if 20,000 people had simply vanished overnight. The second night, I stayed up late processing photos and researching. I'd found references to unusual occurrences at the site, visitors reporting strange dreams, feelings of being watched, glimpses of figures moving between the mounds that disappeared when approached directly. The kind of stories that usually got dismissed as imagination or tourist nonsense. But there were too many of them, stretching back decades, and they were remarkably consistent. People feeling drawn to certain areas of the site, experiencing vivid dreams about ancient ceremonies, waking up with knowledge they shouldn't have about Mississippian culture. I was reading a particularly detailed account from a 1980s archaeological report when I noticed something odd. One of my photo folders was missing from my desktop. I checked the trash, empty. Searched the hard drive, no results. The folder labeled Nevada Ghost Towns had simply vanished, along with 3 weeks' worth of work documenting abandoned mining settlements. Computer glitches happen, especially when you're living in an RV with inconsistent power. I restored the folder from my backup drive and made a mental note to run a diagnostic in the morning. But when I woke up the next day, another folder was gone. This time, it was Detroit Ruins. 2 weeks of photographs documenting the city's abandoned factories and neighborhoods. Again, no trace in the trash or anywhere else on the system. I restored it from backup, but I was starting to feel uneasy. These weren't random system failures. The files were being deleted in chronological order, starting with my oldest work. "Dr. Whitmore," I called when I saw her walking toward the interpretive center. "Can I ask you something?" She approached my RV with that same intense expression I'd noticed before. "Of course. Have you had any problems with electronic equipment here? Computers, cameras, that sort of thing?" Her face went very still. "What kind of problems?" "Files disappearing. Images being deleted without explanation." She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Elena, I need to show you something. But first, I need you to promise me you'll listen to everything I have to say before you make any decisions." She led me into the interpretive center, past the public exhibits to a restricted area marked Research Only. Her office was cramped and cluttered, filled with archaeological artifacts, maps, and stacks of reports. "Cahokia isn't just an abandoned city," she began, settling behind her desk. "It's a repository. A place where certain kinds of information get stored and preserved. I don't understand. The Mississippians who built this place weren't just farmers and traders. They were sophisticated astronomers, mathematicians, engineers. But more than that, they understood something about memory. How to preserve it, how to transfer it, how to make it permanent." She pulled out a thick file folder and spread its contents across her desk. Photographs, reports, testimonies from dozens of visitors over the years. Every person who comes here with any kind of recording device, cameras, video equipment, computers, starts losing their stored memories. Photos, videos, documents. But it's not random deletion. The site is collecting them. That's impossible. Is it? Look at this. She showed me a photograph from 1995, a tourist's snapshot of Monk's Mound. But in the background, barely visible, were structures that shouldn't exist. Wooden buildings, people in ancient dress, smoke rising from fires that weren't there when the photo was taken. "Enhancement technology has gotten better over the years," she continued, spreading out more photos. "We can see them more clearly now. The past is still here, Elena. All of it. Every ceremony, every daily routine, every person who ever lived in this city. It's all preserved somehow, layered like sediment. I stared at the images, my rational mind rejecting what I was seeing, even as my photographer's eye recognized the authentic details. These weren't manipulated or staged. They were genuine glimpses of something impossible. The people didn't leave, Dr. Whitmore continued. They found a way to become part of the place itself. And now the site collects memories, experiences, images. It's trying to rebuild itself, to become whole again. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not the first photographer to camp here, and the others. She pulled out another file. They integrated, became part of the collection. Their memories, their experiences, their artistic vision, all absorbed into whatever consciousness this place has developed. She showed me driver's licenses, credit cards, personal belongings found in abandoned RVs. A dozen photographers and documentarians over the past 20 years, all drawn to Cahokia, all disappeared without a trace. Their work is still here, she said, showing me a laptop filled with thousands of photos from across the country. But they're gone. The site took their memories and gave them something else in return. My hands were shaking. You're saying this place is alive? Not alive in any way we understand, but aware, hungry. It wants to preserve everything, document everything, remember everything. And people like you, artists, photographers, people who see beauty in abandoned places, you're particularly attractive to it. Then why haven't you stopped people from camping here? Her expression was pained. Because I'm part of it too, Elena. I've been here 15 years, ever since I finished my doctoral thesis on Cahokia. I came for a summer research position and never left. I can't leave. The site won't let me. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing what looked like intricate tattoos covering her forearm. But as I looked closer, I realized they were moving, shifting patterns that resembled the aerial view of Cahokia's mound complexes. This appeared after my first year here, she said. It's a map, but also a contract. I'm bound to this place now, part of its memory, part of its collection. And in return, I help it acquire new additions. You're helping it trap people? I'm helping it preserve things that would otherwise be lost. Your photographs, Elena, they're beautiful. They capture something essential about abandoned places, about the persistence of human dreams even after the dreamers are gone. The site wants that perspective, that artistic vision. I stood up quickly, knocking over my coffee cup. I'm leaving. Right now. You can't, she said sadly. Look at your arm. I looked down and felt my blood turn to ice. There, on my forearm, was the beginning of the same pattern I'd seen on Dr. Whitmore. Faint lines that looked like roads and pathways, connecting small circles that could have been mounds or stars or memories. When did this? It starts when you first connect to the place emotionally. For most people, that happens during their second or third night. You felt it, didn't you? That sense of peace, of belonging? I had felt it. The connection to this ancient place. The feeling that I was finally where I was supposed to be. But I thought it was just the satisfaction of finding a good subject for my work. The pattern will spread, Dr. Whitmore continued. Slowly at first, then faster. As it grows, your connection to the site deepens. Your memories become more accessible to it, your artistic vision more integrated with its needs. There has to be a way to stop it. There is, but you won't like it. She led me outside to a maintenance shed behind the interpretive center. Inside were dozens of hard drives, cameras, and computers, the equipment of all the photographers who had come before me. If you destroy all your work, everything you've created, everything you've documented, the site loses its hold on you. But you also lose everything you are as an artist. Your memories of the places you've visited, the skills you've developed, the entire identity you've built around your photography. I stared at the graveyard of abandoned dreams. And if I don't, you become part of the collection. Your consciousness merges with the site's memory. You'll be aware, but you won't be you. You'll be a curator of experiences, helping to preserve and organize the endless stream of memories and images the site collects. What about the other photographers? Are they still aware? She nodded toward Monk's Mound, rising like a sleeping giant against the afternoon sky. They're all there, in a way, part of the site's consciousness. Sometimes I can feel them, see through their eyes, experience their memories. It's not entirely unpleasant. There's a kind of peace in being part of something larger, something eternal. But it's not life. No, she agreed. It's not life as we understand it. That night I sat in my RV surrounded by my equipment, trying to decide what to do. The pattern on my arm had grown noticeably, spreading from my wrist toward my elbow in delicate, maze-like designs. When I touched it, I could feel something like electricity, and for a moment I could sense the vast consciousness underlying Cahokia, patient, ancient, infinitely hungry for new experiences to preserve. More of my photo folders had disappeared. My early work from the Nevada ghost towns, the Detroit ruins, abandoned farmhouses in Kansas. It was methodically working backward through my digital life, claiming each memory, each captured moment. But it wasn't just taking, it was also giving. When I closed my eyes, I could see Cahokia as it had been 1,000 years ago. The great plaza filled with thousands of people during the harvest ceremonies. The sounds of drums and flutes drifting across the prairie, the smell of cooking fires and fresh corn, and the river in summer. I could feel the knowledge flowing into me. The astronomical calculations that had guided the mound builders, the complex social structures that had governed their society, the spiritual beliefs that had made them willing to literally become one with their city. It was seductive to be part of something so much larger than my small, divorced, uncertain life, to have access to centuries of accumulated wisdom and experience, to never be alone again, never be unsure of my purpose. But there was something else in those shared memories. The reason the original inhabitants had made this choice. They hadn't left Cahokia because of drought or disease or warfare. They had discovered something about the nature of consciousness and memory that had terrified them. And rather than let that knowledge die with them, they had chosen to preserve it in the only way they could, by becoming part of the land itself. The knowledge was still here, waiting. The understanding of how memory could be preserved beyond death, how consciousness could be transferred and stored and shared. It was beautiful and terrible and utterly alien to human experience. Around midnight, I made my decision. I started with the hard drives. Every backup, every redundant copy, every preserved moment of my journey across abandoned America. I wiped them methodically, watching years of work dissolve into digital nothingness. The pattern on my arm began to burn as I worked, the maze-like designs writhing and twisting as if trying to prevent what I was doing. But I kept going, deleting folder after folder, erasing the visual diary of my search for identity and purpose. Then I started on the equipment itself. I smashed the cameras with a hammer, shattered the lenses, destroyed the memory cards. Each piece of broken equipment felt like losing a part of myself, but I could feel the site's hold on me weakening with every destroyed image. Finally, I opened my laptop and began deleting the photos I'd taken at Cahokia itself. The sunset shots of Monk's Mound, the atmospheric images of the prairie grass, the detail work on the interpretive signs. My artistic vision of this place, the perspective the site had wanted so desperately to preserve. As the last image disappeared from my hard drive, the pattern on my arm flared with brilliant pain and then faded to nothing. The connection snapped like a severed cable, leaving me gasping and disoriented but free. I didn't wait for dawn. I packed up the RV in darkness and drove away from Cahokia, from Dr. Whitmore, from the ancient consciousness that slept beneath the mounds. I didn't look back until I was across the Mississippi River, but when I did, I could swear I saw lights moving between the mounds. Not electric lights, but the warm glow of fires that had been extinguished 700 years ago. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this from a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, using a notebook and pen because I can't bring myself to touch a camera or computer. The memories are already fading, not just of Cahokia, but of all the places I visited. all the abandoned dreams I tried to document. Sometimes I catch glimpses of what I've lost. A particular quality of light will remind me of a photograph I took but can no longer remember. I'll feel drawn to a derelict building or empty lot, sensing that there's a story there worth preserving, but I no longer have the tools or the vision to capture it. Dr. Whitmore was right. Destroying my work didn't just free me from the site's influence. It erased my identity as an artist, my memories of the journey that had defined my life after divorce. I saved my consciousness, but lost my purpose. But I'm alive, and I'm human, and I'm slowly building a new identity that doesn't depend on capturing the beauty of abandoned places. I work at a bookstore now, helping people find stories instead of creating them. It's smaller than the life I had before, but it's mine. The real tragedy isn't what happened to me. It's what's still happening at Cahokia. Dr. Whitmore is still there, still helping the site collect new editions. Other photographers and artists and documentarians are still being drawn to that ancient place, still falling under its influence. And somewhere beneath Monk's Mound, a consciousness that was once 20,000 individual people continues its patient work of preservation, collecting memories, storing experiences, building a vast archive of human dreams and artistic visions that will last forever, but will never again be truly alive. If you're an artist, if you're drawn to abandoned places, if you feel the pull of mysteries that can't be solved, stay away from Cahokia. The mounds are beautiful, the history is fascinating, and the solitude is seductive. But some places remember too much, and some memories are too dangerous to preserve. The last thing I'll tell you is this. Sometimes, late at night, I can still feel the connection trying to reform. The faint outline of patterns beginning to appear on my arm, the whisper of shared consciousness at the edge of my awareness. The sight is patient. It can wait. And part of me, the part that remembers being an artist, the part that understood the terrible beauty of preservation, part of me wants to go back. But I won't, because I've learned that some dreams are meant to be forgotten, and some places should stay abandoned, even if they never really let you leave. The static from the CB radio had been getting worse for the past hour, but I didn't think much of it until the voices started coming through. My name is Marcus Reed, I'm 42 years old, and what happened to me and my family at Starved Rock State Park in Illinois still haunts every quiet moment I have. We'd been planning this RV trip for months. Sarah, my wife of 15 years, had been working double shifts at the hospital, and our kids, Emma, 13, and Jake, 10, had been cooped up all summer with nothing but video games and streaming services. The 35-foot Winnebago was our escape pod, our chance to reconnect as a family before the school year started again. "Dad, the GPS is acting weird," Emma called from the passenger seat, holding up her phone. The screen flickered between satellite and street view, the blue dot of our location jumping erratically across the map. "Mine too," Sarah said from the kitchen area, where she was securing loose items as we navigated the winding roads through the Illinois River Valley. "Must be the storm coming in." I glanced at the darkening sky through the windshield. The weather report had called for scattered showers, but the clouds building ahead looked more serious than that. Purple-black thunderheads were stacking up like enormous bruises against the late afternoon sky. "We're almost there anyway," I said, checking the mile marker. Starved Rock should be just ahead. The park had been Sarah's choice. She'd read about the hiking trails, the waterfalls, the sandstone canyons carved by glacial meltwater thousands of years ago. What she hadn't mentioned, and what I'd discovered in my own research, were the darker stories associated with the place. The legend of the Illiniwek and Ottawa tribes, the siege that gave the rock its grim name, the more recent disappearances that never quite made it into the tourism brochures. But I kept those thoughts to myself. This was supposed to be a healing trip, a chance to rebuild what we'd been losing in the daily grind of work and school and all the small erosions that chip away at a marriage. The CB radio crackled again, cutting through my thoughts. "Anyone out there? This is campsite 47. We need..." The transmission dissolved into static, then silence. "Someone's in trouble," Jake said, looking up from his Nintendo Switch. At 10, he still had that instinct to help, That assumption that adults could fix anything. Probably just testing their radio, I said, but I reached for the CB handset anyway. This is Winnebago on Route 178, approaching Starved Rock. Anyone need assistance? Nothing but dead air. The entrance to the state park appeared around the next bend, marked by a wooden sign that had seen better decades. The paint was faded, the carved letters filled with shadows even in the dim afternoon light. I pulled up to the ranger station, a small log building that looked like it had been transplanted from a different era. The ranger who emerged was exactly what Central Casting would order for the role. Weathered face, gray beard, the kind of eyes that had seen too much of human nature. His name tag read Kowalski. "Evening, folks," he said, approaching the driver's window. "You're cutting it close. Storm's supposed to be a big one?" "We have a reservation," Sarah said, leaning forward with the confirmation email on her phone. "Campsite 23. Ranger Kowalski glanced at the phone, then back at us. Something flickered across his expression. Concern, maybe, or recognition. 23, he repeated slowly. "You sure about that number?" "That's what the reservation says," I confirmed, though his reaction was making me uneasy. He was quiet for a long moment, studying our faces through the window. The silence stretched until Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Well," he finally said, 23 it is. You follow the main road about 2 miles, then take the left fork. Sights at the end of the loop, backs up to the canyon edge. Real private spot." "Sounds perfect," Sarah said, but I caught the emphasis in his voice on private. "Few things you should know," Kowalski continued, his hand resting on the window frame. "We've had some unusual activity in that area lately. Wildlife's been acting strange. Bears, mostly, but other things too. You see anything that doesn't look right, you radio the ranger station immediately. Channel 19. "What kind of unusual activity?" I asked. "Animals where they shouldn't be. Sounds that don't match anything in the field guides. And..." He paused, glancing at the kids. "Some campers have reported seeing people in the woods who don't seem to be camping anywhere. If anyone approaches your site after dark, don't engage. Just radio us." Emma and Jake exchanged looks. This wasn't the family adventure they'd been expecting. "Is it safe?" Sarah asked. "Safe as anywhere, if you use common sense. Keep your food locked up, don't wander off alone, and stay close to the RV after dark. Storm's supposed to clear by tomorrow afternoon, and you'll have a beautiful day for hiking." He handed us a park map and a small pamphlet about local wildlife. As we pulled away, I caught him in the rearview mirror, still standing in the same spot, watching us disappear around the bend. The campground road wound through dense Illinois woodland. Oak, maple, and hickory trees that formed a green tunnel overhead. The storm clouds had moved closer, bringing an early twilight that made the shadows between the trees seem deeper and more solid than they should have. "This place is creepy," Emma announced. "It's just the weather," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Once we get set up and the sun comes out tomorrow, it'll be beautiful." We passed several occupied campsites, a mix of RVs and tents, families gathered around picnic tables, kids on bicycles. Normal camping scenes that should have been reassuring but somehow felt staged, like everyone was playing a role they didn't quite understand. Campsite 23 was exactly where Ranger Kowalski had said it would be. At the end of a dead-end loop, separated from the other sites by a quarter-mile of forest. The site itself was larger than most, with a concrete pad for the RV, a picnic table, and a fire ring. Beyond the designated camping area, the ground dropped away into what the map labeled as French Canyon, one of the 18 canyons carved into the sandstone by ancient rivers. "Wow," Jake said as we climbed out of the RV. "You can see forever." He was right. From the edge of our campsite, the view opened up across the Illinois River Valley, miles of forest stretching to the horizon. In better weather, it would have been breathtaking. With the storm approaching, it looked like the edge of the world. I spent the next hour getting us set up, extending the slide-outs, connecting the electrical and water, setting up the awning in case the rain started before we could get everything inside. Sarah worked on dinner while the kids explored the immediate area, though I noticed they stayed close to the RV without being told. The first drops of rain started falling just as we finished eating. Big, warm drops that splattered on the picnic table and sent up the smell of dust and ozone. We retreated inside the RV as the drops became a steady patter, then a drumming, then a full-throated downpour that hammered the roof like artillery. "Good thing we're not in a tent," Sarah said, settling onto the dinette bench with a cup of coffee. The kids had claimed the rear bedroom, where they were playing some cooperative video game that involved a lot of shouting and laughter. For a moment, listening to them and watching Sarah read her book in the warm glow of the LED lights, I felt like we'd found what we'd come looking for. Then the CB radio crackled to life. "Can anyone hear me? This is Campsite 47. Something's wrong here. Something's really wrong." The voice was male, middle-aged, tight with fear. I reached for the handset. "This is Campsite 23. What's your situation?" "Thank God. Listen, we need help. My wife, she went out to use the bathhouse about an hour ago and she hasn't come back. I've been looking for her, but..." Static swallowed his words. "But what?" "Over. I found her clothes. By the edge of the woods. Just piled there like she took them off. But there's no sign of her." Sarah looked up from her book, concern creasing her features. "Have you contacted the Rangers?" I asked. "Tried. No answer on Channel 19. No answer on anything except yours. I tried the ranger station myself, but got only dead air. The storm was probably interfering with radio communications, but something about the silence felt wrong. Too complete, too absolute. "What's your name?" I asked the man at Campsite 47. Tom Brennan. We're from Chicago, just down for the weekend. This was supposed to be our anniversary trip." There was something in his voice that made my chest tight. Desperation, yes, but also a kind of bewildered terror, like he was describing something that couldn't possibly be real. "Tom, I want you to stay in your RV. Lock the doors. Don't go looking for her tonight. In the morning, when the storm clears, we'll help you search. I can't just sit here. She could be hurt or lost or..." "Listen to me," I said, thinking of Ranger Kowalski's warnings. "There's something not right in these woods. The ranger warned us about unusual activity. You need to stay inside until daylight." The radio was silent for so long, I thought we'd lost the connection. Then Tom's voice came back, smaller and more frightened than before. "What kind of unusual activity?" Before I could answer, another voice broke through the static. A woman's voice, soft and musical. Tommy, can you hear me?" The change in Tom's voice was immediate. Jenny, where are you? I've been looking everywhere." "I'm here, Tommy. I'm right outside. Come and find me." Sarah and I exchanged looks. There was something wrong with the woman's voice. It was too perfect, too sweet, like honey poured over broken glass. "Tom," I said into the handset, "don't go outside. It's my wife," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Jenny, why didn't you answer when I was calling for you?" "I couldn't hear you, Tommy. The storm. Come outside. I'm waiting for you." "Tom, do not leave your RV," I said urgently. Something's not right, but the radio had gone silent. I tried calling him several more times, but got no response. "What do you think that was about?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," I said, but I had a terrible feeling I did know. The stories I'd read about starved rock, the disappearances, the legends about things in the woods that mimicked human voices to lure people away from safety. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. Lightning strobed through the windows, turning the forest into a series of freeze-frame images. Trees bending in the wind, rain driving horizontally, shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Emma appeared from the back bedroom, her face pale. "Dad, Jake says he can hear someone calling our names outside." My blood went cold. "What?" "Through the bathroom window. Someone calling Emma, Jake, come out and play." I moved quickly to the rear of the RV, where Jake was standing at the small bathroom window, his ear pressed to the glass. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. I listened. Over the sound of the storm, I could just make out something that might have been a voice, high and sweet, like a child's. "Emma, Jake, come out and play. Your parents are waiting." "That's not us," Sarah said firmly. "We're right here." But the voice continued. growing clearer as if whatever was making it was moving closer to the RV. "Come out, come out. The game is starting. Everyone's waiting for you." Jake started toward the door, his eyes vacant and dreamy. I grabbed his arm. "Jake, stop." He looked at me in confusion. "But Emma wants to play. She's outside." "Emma's right here," I said, pointing to his sister who was standing behind me. Jake looked at Emma, then back toward the door, his face scrunched in concentration as if trying to solve a difficult puzzle. "But I can hear her outside," he said. The voice came again, and this time it sounded exactly like Emma's voice. "Jake, come on. Mom and Dad said we could play in the rain," Emma gasped. "That's not me. I didn't say that." I quickly moved through the RV, checking that all the windows were closed and locked, all the doors secured. The voice outside continued its calling, cycling through different family members, promising games and treats and adventures. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. "I don't know," I said, but I was remembering more of the stories now. Things that lived in the deep woods, things that had learned to imitate human speech, things that fed on families stupid enough to answer their calls. The CB radio crackled again. Tom's voice, but different now. Flat and emotionless. "This is campsite 47. Everything is fine now. Jenny came back. We're all fine." I grabbed the handset. Tom, what happened?" "Everything is fine," he repeated in that same monotone. "Jenny came back. We're going to sleep now. Everything is fine. Tom, are you okay?" But there was no response. The radio had gone silent again. Outside, the voice calling our names had stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the calling had been. "I'm scared," Emma said. "It's okay," I told her, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We're safe in here. Whatever's out there can't get in." But even as I said it, I heard something that made my stomach drop. The sound of our RV's exterior storage compartments opening. One by one, the latches clicked and the doors swung open with metallic groans. "What's it looking for?" Sarah whispered. Through the window, I caught glimpses of movement in the lightning flashes. Something tall and thin, moving around our campsite with purposeful intent. It seemed to know exactly where our storage compartments were, how to operate the latches. The awning began to retract with a mechanical whine. Then the water hose disconnected with a hiss and a splash. Our outdoor lights went out one by one. "It's cutting us off," I realized, "isolating us." The CB radio burst to life again, but this time it was our own voices coming through the speaker. "Help us," Emma's voice pleaded. "We're trapped in the RV. Something's trying to get in." "That's not us," the real Emma whispered. "Please," my own voice said through the radio. "We're at campsite 23. Send help. It's breaking in." Sarah's voice joined the chorus. "The children are in danger." Oh God, the children. I switched off the radio, but the voices continued for a few seconds before fading to static. "It's learning," I said. "It's listening to us and learning our voices." Outside, something heavy scraped against the side of the RV. Then came a sound I'd never heard before and hope never to hear again. A wet, sliding noise, like something massive and boneless pulling itself along the exterior walls. Jake pointed at one of the side windows. "Dad, look." Pressed against the glass was what might have been a hand, if hands were twice the normal size and had too many joints. The fingers were elongated and white, with black crescents where the nails should have been. As we watched, it slowly dragged across the window, leaving streaks of something dark and viscous. "Don't look at it," I said, pulling the kids away from the window. "Everyone stay in the center of the RV, away from the walls." But the sounds were coming from all sides now. Scraping, sliding, tapping. Whatever was out there was exploring every inch of our RV, testing for weaknesses. The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath, Emma's muffled sob, Jake's whispered prayers. The emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a red glow that made the interior of the RV look like the inside of a heart. Something heavy landed on the roof with a thud that shook the entire vehicle. Then came the sound of claws or talons scraping across the aluminum, seeking purchase, seeking a way in. The CB radio turned itself back on. "This is Campsite 23, my voice said through the static. "We're all dead now. We're all dead, and it's beautiful here. Come join us. Bring your families. Bring your children." I lunged for the radio and yanked the power cord from the wall, but the voice continued. "The children taste like honey," Emma's voice added. "Sweet, sweet honey." Outside, more voices joined the chorus. Tom from Campsite 47, his wife Jenny, and others I didn't recognize, all speaking in that same flat, emotionless tone, all promising wonderful things to anyone who might be listening. Then, suddenly, silence. The scraping stopped. The weight on the roof lifted. Even the storm seemed to pause, as if the whole world was holding its breath. "Is it gone?" Jake whispered. Before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. 3 polite raps like a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. "Hello," called a cheerful female voice. "Is anyone home? I'm from the ranger station. We had a report of some trouble out here." Sarah started toward the door, but I caught her arm. "The rangers would radio first," I whispered, "and Kowalski was a man." The knocking came again, more insistent. "Please, I know you're in there. I can help you. I can take you somewhere safe." "We're fine," I called through the door. "We don't need help." "Oh, but you do," the voice said, and now it was different, darker with an edge of amusement. "You need so much help. You're all alone out here, and there are things in the woods that are so hungry. They've been waiting so long for a family like yours." The door handle rattled. "Let me in," the voice commanded, and there was nothing human in it now. "Let me in, and I'll make it quick. Keep me out here, and I'll take my time with the children." Emma was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Jake had pressed himself against my side, his small body trembling. "The windows," Sarah whispered, pointing. All around the RV, faces were appearing at the windows. Pale, elongated faces with 2 wide smiles and eyes like black holes. Some looked almost human. Others were clearly something else, wearing human features like ill-fitting masks. They began to tap on the glass in unison, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to match my heartbeat. "Let us in, let us in, let us in," they chanted. The tapping grew faster, more insistent. One of the windows began to crack under the pressure. That's when I remembered the emergency flare gun in the overhead compartment. I'd bought it years ago and never used it, but I'd made sure it was loaded and functional. I pulled it down and moved to the front of the RV. "When I fire this, everyone get to the back bedroom and lock the door," I said. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Sarah asked. "Making some noise. Maybe someone will see it." I aimed the flare gun at the front window and pulled the trigger. The flare burst through the glass in a shower of sparks and illuminated the campsite in brilliant red light. The things outside shrieked and recoiled, covering their faces with those elongated hands. "Now!" I shouted. We ran for the back bedroom and slammed the door behind us. Through the small bedroom window, I could see the flare burning on the ground outside, casting wild shadows as the things circled it like moths around a flame. But they were learning. One by one, they began to approach the light, their movements becoming bolder as they realized it couldn't hurt them. "The radio," Sarah said, pointing to the small CB unit mounted near the bed. "Try the emergency channel." I turned to channel 9 and keyed the handset. "Mayday, Mayday, this is an RV at Starved Rock State Park, Campsite 23. We are under attack by unknown assailants. Request immediate assistance." Static, then a familiar voice. "This is Ranger Kowalski. We're on our way. Hold tight." Relief flooded through me. "How long until you get here?" "Already here," Kowalski's voice said, and I heard footsteps outside the RV. "Just need you to open the door so we can help." But something was wrong. The footsteps were too heavy, too rhythmic, and Kowalski's voice, while recognizable, had that same flat quality I'd heard from Tom earlier. "Dad," Emma whispered, pointing at the bedroom window. Outside, illuminated by the dying flare, I could see Ranger Kowalski walking toward our RV, but his movements were wrong, puppet-like, as if something else was controlling his body. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his eyes reflected the red light like an animal's. "That's not him," I said. As if he'd heard me, the thing wearing Kowalski's face turned toward our window and smiled. its mouth opened far too wide, revealing rows of teeth that belonged to no human being. "Open the door, Marcus," it said in Kowalski's voice. "Let me help your family." The real terror wasn't that these things could mimic human voices. It was that they were wearing human faces, human bodies. How many campers at Starved Rock had already been taken? How many of the people I'd seen at other campsites were actually these creatures wearing stolen skins? The bedroom door rattled. Something was trying to get in from the main part of the RV. "How did it get inside?" Sarah gasped. Through the gap under the door, I could see shadows moving in the red emergency lighting. Multiple shapes, circling like predators. "Mommy? Daddy?" Jake's voice called from the other side of the door. But Jake was right here beside me, pressed against Sarah's side. "We know you're in there," Emma's voice added. "Why won't you come out and play with us?" "Don't listen," I told my children. "Those aren't your voices." But the fake Jake giggled, a sound that was almost right, but not quite. "We're your children now, Daddy. We're your favorite children. Open the door and see how much we love you." The bedroom window exploded inward. Glass showered across the small room as something massive forced its way through the opening. In the red emergency lighting, I caught glimpses of pale flesh. Too many limbs. Eyes like wet marbles. Sarah screamed. Emma and Jake pressed themselves into the corner farthest from the window. I raised the flare gun, but I'd already used the only flare. The thing that had been Ranger Kowalski squeezed through the window with impossible flexibility, its body contorting like liquid. Up close, I could see that his ranger uniform was real, but the body wearing it was all wrong. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in directions human joints shouldn't go. "Now we can all be together," it said in Kowalski's voice, reaching for Emma with fingers that stretched like taffy. I threw myself between them, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the nightstand. The beam caught the creature full in the face and it shrieked and recoiled. Its features began to melt and run like wax, revealing something underneath that my mind refused to process completely. "The light!" I shouted. "It doesn't like bright light." Sarah grabbed another flashlight and aimed it at the bedroom door, where more shapes were trying to force their way in. They hissed and withdrew when the beam hit them. But our flashlight batteries wouldn't last forever, and there were so many of them. That's when I heard it. The distant sound of real sirens, real engines, real human voices shouting commands. The creatures heard it too. They froze, their stolen faces turning toward the sounds of approaching rescue. "Time to go," the thing wearing Kowalski's face said, but its voice was different now. Disappointed. "We'll see you again soon, Marcus. You and your beautiful family." It flowed back out through the broken window like smoke, followed by the other shapes. Within seconds, the RV was silent except for our ragged breathing and the approaching sirens. The real rescue team found us 20 minutes later. State police, paramedics, and a park ranger I'd never seen before. A young woman named Martinez, who looked nothing like the thing that had worn Kowalski's face. "Where's Ranger Kowalski?" I asked as the paramedics checked us over. Martinez frowned. "There's no Ranger Kowalski at this park. Never has been." My blood went cold, but he checked us in. He warned us about unusual activity. "Sir, our entrance station has been closed for renovations for the past month. All reservations are handled online and campers are supposed to self-register at the payment station." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Then who did we talk to?" She didn't have an answer for that. They found the remains of Tom and Jenny Brennan at campsite 47. What was left of them anyway? The official report blamed animal predation, but I saw the scene before they covered it up. No animal had done that. We never found out what happened to Ranger Kowalski, because according to all official records, he'd never existed. But I know what I saw. I know who checked us in, who warned us, who tried to protect us even after something had taken his body. The insurance company paid for the RV repairs, the broken windows, the damaged awning, the scratches in the aluminum siding that looked almost like claw marks. They didn't ask too many questions about how a storm could cause that kind of damage. We never went camping again. The kids don't ask to anymore, and Sarah won't even drive past an RV dealership without changing the subject. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I catch her listening to something I can't hear, her body tense and ready to run. Because we all know the truth, even if we don't talk about it. Those things are still out there, in the deep woods, in the places where people go to get away from civilization. They're patient, they're hungry, and they're very, very good at pretending to be human. The CB radio in my garage still picks up transmissions sometimes, late at night when the atmospheric conditions are just right. Voices calling for help from campgrounds that don't exist. Families trapped in situations that can't be real. But I don't answer anymore, because I know that some of those voices are theirs, still trying to lure new victims into their web. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear a voice I recognize. Ranger Kowalski, still trying to warn people, still trying to protect families like mine from what's waiting in the woods. But nobody listens to ghost rangers. Nobody heeds the warnings of the dead. The last thing I'll tell you is this. If you're ever camping and someone approaches your site after dark, if they know more about you than they should, if they warn you about dangers in the woods, listen to them. Because the real monsters aren't the ones trying to help you. They're the ones wearing the faces of the people who tried to help you and failed. And they're still out there, waiting for the next family to answer their call. The dolls started appearing in my RV on the third morning, perfectly arranged on my kitchen counter like tiny dinner guests waiting for a meal. My name is Dr. Rebecca Chen. I'm 45 years old, and what happened to me at Apple River Canyon State Park in Illinois proved that some collectors never stop hunting, even after death. I'd been touring the Midwest in my 32-foot Winnebago for 2 months, researching historical murder cases for my true crime podcast, Forgotten Victims. As a retired forensic psychologist, I had access to cold case files that most people never saw, and I specialized in cases where the killers had never been caught, the ones that kept small-town cops awake at night decades later. Apple River Canyon was supposed to be a relaxing stop between research locations. I just spent a week in Wisconsin documenting the unsolved Kenosha Strangler cases from the 1970s, and I needed a few days to decompress before heading to Iowa to investigate a series of missing children cases from the 1980s. The park seemed perfect, remote, quiet, with hiking trails that would let me clear my head and process the dark material I'd been immersed in. The autumn colors were spectacular, and the canyon carved by the Apple River over thousands of years provided the kind of natural beauty that helped balance out the human ugliness I studied for a living. What I didn't know was that I'd chosen the former hunting ground of Illinois' most prolific uncaught serial killer, a man whose crimes had been so carefully covered up that they'd never even made it into the official records I'd spent my career analyzing. The campground host who checked me in was a nervous, thin man in his 70s named Walter Grimm. He had the pallor of someone who spent too much time indoors and the jumpy demeanor of a person carrying secrets. "You picked a good spot," he said, glancing repeatedly at the folder of case files visible on my passenger seat. "Site 31 is real private. Backs up to the old part of the canyon, where nobody goes anymore." "Why doesn't anyone go there?" I asked, following his gaze to the thick woods beyond the camping area. "Oh, just rough terrain. Easy to get lost. Plus the history." He paused, seeming to catch himself. "I mean, just old logging roads, abandoned homesteads, nothing interesting for tourists." But his reaction suggested otherwise. There was something about that part of the canyon that made him uncomfortable. And after 20 years of reading people's tells and micro-expressions, I could sense he was holding something back. "What kind of history?" I pressed. "Nothing worth mentioning," he said quickly, but his hands were trembling as he filled out my registration card. "Just, if you're planning to hike, stick to the marked trails. People have gotten turned around back there. Had to call in search and rescue more than once." He handed me the registration card and hurried away before I could ask any more questions, leaving me with the distinct impression that Walter Grimm was afraid of something in those woods. I spent the first day setting up my mobile office, the dining area of the RV converted into a workspace with my laptop, case files, recording equipment, and research materials. I'd been working on a particularly complex case from the 1970s involving a series of child abductions in rural Illinois, trying to find connections that the original investigators had missed. The files made for grim reading, 7 children between the ages of 6 and 12 had vanished from small towns across northern Illinois over a 3-year period. No bodies were ever found, no ransom demands were ever made, and no suspects were ever seriously pursued. The cases had gone cold individually, and no one had ever connected them as the work of a single perpetrator. But I could see the pattern, the geographical clustering, the similar victimology, the careful selection of children from broken homes who wouldn't be missed immediately. Someone had been hunting very systematically, very intelligently, and they'd gotten away with it completely. That first night, I dreamed about dolls, hundreds of them, arranged in neat rows like an army of tiny soldiers. They were antique dolls with porcelain faces and glass eyes, dressed in period clothing from different decades. But their expressions were wrong. Too knowing, too aware, as if something human was looking out from behind those painted features. I woke with the unsettling feeling that the dream had been more than just my subconscious processing the dark case material. There had been something specific about those dolls, something that felt like a memory rather than imagination. The second day, I decided to explore the hiking trails Walter had warned me about. As a forensic psychologist, I'd learned that understanding the geography of crimes was crucial to understanding the criminals who committed them. If someone had been operating in this area, I needed to see it through their eyes. The marked trails were well maintained and clearly signed, winding through the canyon along the Apple River and up to scenic overlooks. But about 2 miles from the campground, I found what I was looking for. An unmarked path that branched off from the main trail and disappeared into the deeper woods. The moment I stepped onto that path, I felt the change. The forest seemed older here, more primal. The trees were larger, their canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight reached the forest floor. The air was cooler and carried scents that seemed wrong for October in Illinois. Not the crisp smell of autumn leaves, but something stale and sweet, like flowers left too long in a closed room. The path led to a clearing where the remains of an old homestead sat slowly returning to nature. The house itself was long gone, but I could make out the foundation stones and the remnants of what had once been a well. More interesting was the small outbuilding that was still partially intact, a root cellar or storage shed built into the hillside. I approached carefully, my psychologist's training making me hyper-aware of my surroundings. The door to the shed was wooden and partially rotted, hanging open just wide enough for me to peer inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The interior walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, spanning decades. But these weren't family snapshots or nature photography. They were surveillance photos. Children playing in yards, walking to school, riding bicycles, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. And in the center of the back wall, arranged on a makeshift shelf, were dozens of dolls. The same antique dolls from my dream, with their porcelain faces and period clothing and those terrible, knowing expressions. I backed away from the shed and fumbled for my phone to call the police, but I had no signal. The canyon walls and dense forest were blocking the cell towers, and I was miles from the nearest road. I needed to get back to my RV and drive to somewhere I could get help. This was clearly evidence of serious crimes, possibly including the child abduction cases I'd been researching. But as I turned to leave, I heard something that made me freeze. Laughter, children's laughter, coming from deeper in the woods. My rational mind knew it couldn't be children. This area was miles from any playground or residential area, and the laughter had an odd quality to it. Too high, too silvery, like wind chimes in a storm. But the forensic psychologist in me was curious. If someone was using this area for criminal activity, any evidence could be crucial to solving decades-old cases. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, my phone held high as I searched for even a single bar of signal. The laughter seemed to move ahead of me, always just out of sight around the next bend in the barely visible path. The path led to another clearing, this one dominated by a massive oak tree that had to be centuries old. And there, arranged in a perfect circle around the base of the tree, were more dolls. Dozens of them, all different styles and ages, all facing inward toward the trunk as if they were attending some kind of ceremony. But these dolls were different from the ones in the shed. These were newer, more modern, and they were dressed in children's clothing that looked disturbingly familiar. A red sweater that matched one I'd seen in a missing child report from 1987. A blue dress identical to one worn by a victim in a 1992 case file. That's when I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't just evidence of crimes, it was a trophy collection. Someone had been taking children for decades, and they'd been keeping mementos of their victims in the form of dolls dressed in their clothing. The laughter came again, closer now, and I spun around to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a man, elderly, wearing outdated clothing that looked like it hadn't been changed in decades. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes had the flat, emotionless quality I'd learned to recognize in psychopaths. "Dr. Chen," he said, and his voice had the same silvery quality as the laughter. "I've been waiting for you. How do you know my name? I know everything about my visitors. Rebecca Chen, age 45, retired forensic psychologist, specializing in cold cases and serial offenders. You've been researching the missing children cases from the 1970s and 80s. My hand went instinctively to the pepper spray on my belt, but he seemed unconcerned by the threat. "You found my collection," he continued, gesturing to the dolls arranged around the tree. "Impressive, isn't it? 43 years of careful work. Each doll represents a perfect specimen, perfectly preserved. You're talking about children, human beings. I'm talking about art," he said, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of a collector discussing rare stamps. The process of preservation, of capturing innocence at its peak and making it eternal. "Do you know how difficult it is to find perfect specimens? Children untainted by the corruption of the modern world?" I was slowly backing away from him, trying to put distance between us while keeping him talking. Serial killers often love to discuss their work, and the longer I could keep him engaged, the better my chances of escaping. "Where are the children now?" I asked. "Safe," he said. "Preserved. They're with me always in the most permanent way possible." He gestured again to the dolls, and I understood with growing horror what he was implying. The dolls weren't just dressed in the victim's clothing, they contained something of the victims themselves. "You're insane," I whispered. "I'm a perfectionist," he corrected. "And you, Dr. Chen, represent a unique opportunity. A professional who can appreciate the complexity of my work, the psychological sophistication required to operate undetected for so many decades. The authorities will find this place. When I don't return, you'll return," he said calmly. "You'll return to your RV tonight, and you'll continue your research. But now you'll be researching from the inside, as it were. You'll understand my work in a way that no one else ever has." That's when I noticed the doll he was holding. A newer one, dressed in clothes identical to what I was wearing. A miniature version of me, complete down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. "When did you make that?" "This morning, while you were hiking. I've been preparing for your arrival since you made your reservation. Walter told me about you. A true crime researcher, someone who would be irresistibly drawn to my collection." Walter, the nervous campground host who'd warned me away from this part of the canyon. He was part of this somehow, either helping the killer or too terrified to report what he knew. "Walter's been helping you?" "Walter's been helping me for 40 years, the man said. "Ever since I chose his daughter for my collection. He understands the consequences of not cooperating." I felt sick. Walter hadn't been nervous because he was keeping secrets. He'd been nervous because he was trapped, forced to lure victims to this killer by the threat of what would happen if he refused. "And now you'll help me too," the killer continued. "You'll return to your research, but you'll be working for me, documenting my achievements for posterity. Think of it as the ultimate true crime story, told from the killer's perspective. I'll never help you." "Oh, but you will, because the alternative is joining my collection permanently, and I think you're too valuable to waste that way. You have knowledge, expertise, access to resources I could use. You could help me perfect my techniques, maybe even expand my operation to other states." He was talking about me becoming his partner, his collaborator in decades of child murder. The thought made me physically ill. But I also recognized the strategic opportunity. If I could convince him I was interested, I might be able to get close enough to overpower him or find a way to escape. "What would you need me to do?" I asked. His eyes lit up with excitement. "First, you'd help me catalog the collection properly. I've kept detailed records, but a professional perspective would be invaluable. Then you could help me identify new hunting grounds, new potential specimens. And if I refuse?" He held up the doll that looked like me, and I saw that its tiny hands were positioned as if it were pleading for help. "Then you become doll number 44, he said simply. I needed to buy time, to find a way to signal for help or escape from this clearing. The sun was getting lower, and I had no desire to be trapped in these woods after dark with this monster. "I need time to think about it," I said. "Of course, it's a big decision. Why don't you return to your RV tonight and consider my offer? We can discuss the details tomorrow." He was letting me go. It seemed too easy, but I wasn't about to argue. "How do I know you won't just kill me anyway?" "Because I'm a collector, Dr. Chen, not a simple murderer. I only take what I need for my collection, and I only take it when the conditions are perfect. You have value to me alive and cooperative." I backed away from the clearing, keeping my eyes on him until the trees blocked my view. Then I ran. The path back to the main trail seemed longer than it had on the way in, and I had the constant feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow between the trees could have been him following me. Every sound could have been his footsteps on the forest floor. By the time I reached my RV, it was almost dark. I immediately tried my phone, but I still had no signal. The campground seemed deserted. No other RVs, no sign of Walter or anyone else who might help. I locked every door and window, closed all the blinds, and tried to think. I needed to get to a phone, contact the FBI, report what I'd found. But I also knew that if I simply drove away, this killer would disappear again. He'd operated undetected for 4 decades. He was clearly an expert at covering his tracks. I needed evidence. Photographs of the crime scene, documentation of the doll collection, something that would convince the authorities to take immediate action. That's when I noticed that the dolls on my kitchen counter had been rearranged. When I'd left that morning, they'd been facing the dinette area. Now they were all turned toward the bedroom, as if watching something. I hadn't brought any dolls with me. They'd appeared in my RV while I was hiking, just as the killer had claimed he'd made the doll in my image while I was away. But more unsettling was what I found when I checked my laptop. My research files had been accessed, and new files had been added to my case folders. Files with names like Collection Inventory 1979-2023 and Preservation Techniques, Updated Methods. He'd been in my RV. While I was discovering his crime scene, he'd been here, going through my research, adding his own documentation to my files. I opened one of the new files and immediately wished I hadn't. It was a detailed catalog of his victims, complete with photographs, personal information, and descriptions of what he called preservation methods. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror of what I was reading. Decades of child abduction, torture, and murder, all documented with the enthusiasm of a hobbyist discussing his passion. But what made it